All right, welcome everybody to the Corpus Christi Songwriter Podcast. I'm Jules.
I'm Jimmy.
I'm Steven.
All right. Yeah, this is Steven Hansen. He's a local musician, and we'll get into everything that this man does. He's done it all at some point, and including he was a former president of the Corpus Christi Songwriters. So we'll
wow.
dive into that as well.
Yep.
But for the listener that may not know who you are, dive in real quick. Tell us who you are, Steven.
Oh, all right.
You can do that. You can do that philosophically, or you can do that, detail oriented. Completely up to you. I know Jules will appreciate the philosophical.
Well, let's see. I moved to Corpus Christi, Texas, about 16 years ago, so I've been here a little while. I was born in California, and then migrated to Texas when I was with my family. My dad was Navy, so we moved around and landed in Texas. And I went to school here. I was homeschooled here, and then when I went away for college, I went to Full Sail, which is an audio engineering school. Well, they do more than audio engineering. They do film and video game design and all sorts of cool stuff. But I was into audio engineering, so I went there, studied that, and then I moved from Full Sail in Florida to Austin, and I spent about 10 years in Austin doing audio engineering stuff, working for a couple studios there. One in particular was called Music Lab, which was like a combination of a recording studio and a bunch of rehearsal spaces as well. So they had a nice recording studio set aside, and then they had like 50 rooms with a bunch of PAs that you could set up. So I was pretty green on the scene. I got hired in their store. It was a pretty funny story, actually. I didn't know what to expect. I was a new engineer, just out of school. I didn't know how to get a job in that field, but I wanted one. And so I showed up to the location wearing like a suit. And,
perfect.
And the dude who was sitting there was like, he had a mohawk. And so I was like, "Hey, what's up, man? I'm looking for a job." And he hired me. Like,
yes, this man clearly needs a job.
That's right. He needs a job. Yeah. So he hired me, started working there, doing, setting up PA systems in these rehearsal rooms. And the way it would work is people would have lockouts, and they would have hourly rooms, right? So the hourly rooms would be open. It's 24-hour facility, right? So people could come in at any time. And my job was to go unlock their room and set up their PA for them and make sure they were happy. And that was my job for a while. There was a lot of floor mopping and running and getting snacks and selling drumsticks and guitar strings and a lot of that for a while. And then I got my crack at the studio and became friends with the lead audio engineer there. And he kind of took me under his wing and mentored me. Spent about 10 years there. So long story short, kind of cut my teeth at the Music Lab in Austin, and then as a result of that, started doing festivals, working South by Southwest and all the stuff that was happening in Austin. Music Lab had a really big rental facility. So when South by Southwest would happen and Austin City Limits and stuff, people would come into town from, overseas and out of town, and nobody would want to bring their gear. So we had all this gear, drum sets and organs and keyboards and stuff people don't want to fly with, right? So we would load up just this army of Ryder trucks and U-Haul trucks with all this gear, and we would just ship it out to all over Austin. And it was this massive operation. It was a lot of fun. And that's kind of, I was a young man. I was in my 20s. And so that was what I was doing. And then let's see, I guess I was 28. I got married. I married my sweetheart girlfriend in San Antonio, and she came up to live with me in Austin. and we lived there for a few years. And then I kind of completely changed focus. I came down to Corpus, visiting my family who lived down here. And I got approached by a friend of mine at a Christmas party who was a pastor. And he asked me if I'd be willing to like help him with their music. So music, I didn't really mention that. Music has been a part of my life forever.
Right.
But I pursued, like professionally, I pursued the audio engineering stuff because like who's going to make any money doing music? You know?
Yeah.
So I kind of pursued them both, right? But engineering kept me close to music, and so anyway, went down to Corpus, had this conversation, said I'd help him out. So I went to the church and led some songs for him, which I had never done before. So it was a very new experience for me. Never led worship in a church before, or played music in a church before.
Right.
Anyway, that turned into another. They asked me to come back, and then it was like once a month, and then it was twice a month, and then it became like, man, I can't do this anymore because coming back and forth from Austin all the time is just killing me. And he's like, well, what if we gave you a job, like we paid you a salary? I was like, salary?
Wow.
You're going to pay me to play music on a salary? Okay. So, that began this journey into Corpus Christi with my wife and into the church, and it was an interesting transition for me because my experience prior to that had been, playing bars and restaurants and gigs and stuff like that. And so it was a different world. And I came into it with just a real different, I don't know how to put this. I didn't have a real high view of music in church, right? I always thought, when I was growing up and went to church, I always thought the music was kind of cheesy.
Yeah.
And
sorry, I didn't mean to say yeah so quickly.
No, because it's true. It was. And so the last thing I ever wanted to do was, be a worship leader, and
right.
And yet here I was with this opportunity to do this. And it was an opportunity for me to provide for my family and make a full-time salary and play music. Right. So I didn't take that lightly. But when I first went into it, I approached it very much like I would a gig, right? I was arranging these songs and like trying to take hymns and things and older like church songs and try to like make them cool and put them in keys that were, performance keys and all of that stuff. And I did that for a number of years, and it was, it was fine. And people liked it, but I think the more time that went on, I began to realize that that's not what that job was actually, right? That job that they hired me to do wasn't just to go and like entertain them, right? And over time, that became more clear to me. And then it became something like I was like the servant of the church to try to like create environments and spaces for people to worship, right? And so all of a sudden it was like, all right, well, it's not about me. Like, I have to put things in keys that people can sing, and I have to like facilitate this environment of trying to engage people, right? Engage people in their worship, engage people in their singing. And then that began like the next kind of stage of my journey musically in the church. And then it became just working with lots and lots of people. Like churches have lots of people, right? So there's talent all over the place. Like some little kids who play music, and
right.
some of them are pretty good. And then I, being in Corpus for a long time and being connected with you guys, with the CC Songwriters and all of that. I mean, you meet lots of musicians, and so a lot of the people that I've played with over the years have been people that I've met playing at bars, and they're just really great musicians, and and they come in and they become part of this community, and it's a really cool thing, man. It's a really it's been really life-giving for me, And,
Yeah,
and I would wager to say life-giving for a lot of the people who have come and played with me there. So,
I mean, you seem to truly love it. It's I think divined a good portion of your life here. So I'm glad you found that. But before we dive more into that, I wanted to ask about Wounded Dogs Choir. When
oh man, way back.
So yeah, get into the music a little bit more. When did you record that in Austin, or how did that come about?
I did. So when I was working for Music Lab in Austin, I had been there about 8 years, I think. And my job up to that point had just been recording other people. And I had never had any capital or really the time or the material to record anything of my own. But I was, on the back end, I was writing songs. I'm a musician, so I was doing that. And I got the opportunity. My grandfather gave me $10,000 for Christmas.
Oh, wow. That's a Christmas present.
It was a Christmas present, and it was more of like he had an investment account. And he, well, the long story or the short story is he had an investment account and he had to divest some money so he didn't get taxed on it. And so he divested it to all the grandkids. And so I became the recipient of $10,000, which I'd never had in my life. all of a sudden I had all this money. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to record a record.
Naturally.
Naturally. I'm like, I'm not going to buy a car, right? Make an album.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Yeah, that's right. So I had money and I had a studio and I had I had this Rolodex of all of these studio players, right? All these people I'd been recording for years and people I'd met there at the studio who are all really stinking good at their craft. And so I started hiring people. I started hiring drummers and horn players and mandolin players and all of this stuff. And me and my boss at Music Lab, I hired him to produce the record. And so it was super fun. And it was the last thing that I did at Music Lab. I was kind of on my way out. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to take advantage of this whole situation. So it was a super fun project. It was 10 songs that I wrote by myself and with a co-writer there in Austin. Her name is Joey Lanier. It's a friend of mine. And we just started writing songs, and Tim Guerin produced them. And it took about a year to do it all. And because we kind of did it in spare time, and I tried to make the money last as much as I could. But man, it's funny when I look back on that project, I was super green as a songwriter, but I had this great studio,
Yeah.
So it sounds amazing. Like the record itself sounds really, really polished.
Right. I remember when I heard it for the first time, I was like, how did this, I'm trying not to cuss in front of you, but how did this motherfucker record this album and make it sound so good?
Yeah, well, I had help. That's the short answer. But no, when I wrote it, or when we worked on it, okay, looking back now, I see the songwriting is super green, but the recording is good. And one day I want to write a record that is, got mature songwriting and sounds good.
Well, what's stopping you?
Well, shoot, that's the rub. So the other side of the working for the church thing is, and I alluded this earlier to you, is that it kind of drains you of your creative energy a little bit. And I think this just has to do with my personality. I'm one of those guys who just works on something until I have no more time to work on it. Right. So when I start a set on Sunday, it becomes like this personal thing. Like I'm working towards this, in my mind, it's like this artistic masterpiece that I'm trying to make. Right. Mm-hmm. And then I work on it. I book people, I practice with them, I get it all set. And then Sunday happens, and then Monday happens. And it's like, it all starts over again. I don't get to use the same thing over and over. I'm not working for one body of music. I'm like, I've been doing this for 15 years now. And I think just the way my temperament is that I don't put boundaries around my creative energy. And so I just spend it 100%. And then when it comes time to like write my own songs, I just basically, I just give the dregs, like every now and then a good song, I'll write something that I like, but it's mostly out of just exhaustion and not out of creativity. And so I'm becoming aware of that after 15 years of this. I'm becoming aware that that's what's going on. And I was just telling my wife this the other day. I have to learn how to put boundaries around my creative energy and be like, hey, you know what? This is work, right? This is what I do for work. And then I have to leave something. And so, I've known you for a long time. We've done a lot of things together with like the Churchyard and CC Songwriters and things like that.
Right.
And it used to be that I had more, I would go out and I would play and, I played gigs at Blackbeard's for, on the beach for 10 years while I was here. That's another thing that'll drain you, is playing gigs in the same spot for 10 years. Oh yeah.
To an audience that doesn't even care if you're there.
That just wants to hear, just wants to hear covers. And, yeah. They were sorely disappointed with me because I hardly ever played covers when I was there.
That's pretty much why Blackbeard's never invited me back either. I'm pretty sure anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, after a while, it became about the money. It's like it was money, and I needed it. And so I just did what I had to do. And at the sacrifice of your creative spirit, I suppose. So I'm a little bit of a wounded dog.
There you go. That's also fitting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Wounded Dogs Choir, the name, when I was in Austin, one of the jobs that I had, because I was a musician, I was working multiple jobs, right? So I was working in the studio, I was working music, and then I was managing a gymnastics gym. So growing up, I did gymnastics all through almost college, right? And so I had this skill of doing that, and so I started teaching, and then that morphed into managing. Anyway, long story short, I was doing that, and I had this boys team, who I would work to death. I'd push-ups, pull-ups, and we just conditioned the crap out of them. And they were moaning and whining, and I can't remember how it happened, but somebody walked up and they're like, "You sound like a Wounded Dogs Choir."
That's perfect.
I kind of like that. I don't know why, but it's,
and it immediately sets the tone for what you're expecting for the record, and your record does not sound like a Wounded Dogs choir. No. So which is I find also very, very fitting. Tell me about Truett's World. That's the song that always pops in my head when I think about this record. And I know Truett's is probably going on 30 now.
Yeah, Truett is my nephew, my oldest sister's son, so my first nephew. And I wrote that song for him. It was these were my first attempts at writing songs. So I didn't have any framework for doing anything like this. Mm-hmm. My songwriting before that wasn't really songwriting. It was more like jam writing. I would just sit and record a riff, and I mean, shoot, back in the day, it was before the studios and stuff. I had like you remember those shoebox recorders that you could get at Radio Shack? I'm going to show my age right now.
I'm not sure if I had one of those.
It's like a little rectangle that you would stick a tape into. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about, man. Yeah.
Had a little microphone on the top that wasn't actually a microphone. It was just like a couple slots, and you'd stick your tape in and you push record and play at the same time. And I had 2 of those. My dad had 2 of them. And so I would record a riff on the guitar on the shoebox recorder, and then I would rewind the tape and I'd put the tape in another shoebox recorder and push play, and take the other shoebox recorder and put it on top of it so that the microphone was as close to the speaker as I could get it. And then I'd push play and record the recording that I had just made with a little bit more.
That's funny.
And then I'd do it again and again and again and again. And so I was it was early overdubbing. Right?
I did the same thing, but it was with just a stereo I had that had 2 cassette sides, so I could actually record one side, move the tape over, put another tape in, and record over that, and just do that infinitely until I was happy with what I had.
So by the end of it, like pretty much all you hear is like, with like the hint of an acoustic guitar and some dude singing in the back.
Wow, this is recorded in the 1800s.
Yeah. So all this to answer your question about Truth World, I all of my songwriting up until that point had just been more like, well, first of all, it was like metal and rock and roll and stuff like that, because that was how I grew up. And Truth's World was like written on an acoustic guitar, and I hadn't really started writing poetry much, and so that was a first attempt at that. And it really was just a song that I tried to write for my nephew. I needed a subject matter, and I thought, hey, I love this kid, and he was just a baby when I wrote it. It was a new experience for me. I'd never been an uncle before, right? Yeah. And so just started thinking about him and what he might be like, as he grows up, and started putting that together with an acoustic guitar, and that's Truth's World.
It's beautiful. So before I ask any more questions, are you ready for one of your philosophical ones, Jules? Or
I mean, I don't know. I've been thinking about like asking you about. There's a couple different things, right? One, I just want to ask you the question about the orchestration part of it, I guess, because when I think about how you might go about organizing the music for a given set, I wonder how much you interact with like the preacher as to like different sections of what he's going to do. If there's going to be a middle section where he does something where he needs a special piece or something like that. But on the other side of it, I wonder like, if you need someone to feel fortuitous, so you're like, all right, well, F minor and Lydian or something. Like, are you, like, are you thinking like from an affect down sort of way of orchestrating or the musical numbers you're selecting or composing? Like, can you maybe tease some of that out in what I've just described, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. I would say all of the above of what you just described. So one of the great things about being able to play music for a living is I have the time, right? So I literally sit in front of a computer with a guitar almost all day, and I have for almost 15 years, right? So I get a lot of time to read. I get a lot of time to tinker and to think. And so, yes, to answer your question, I spend a lot of time in conversations with the pastors to kind of find out what they're trying to accomplish, right? What is it that they're talking about? Is it, okay, so if they're preaching from a passage of scripture, if they're talking about a particular passage of scripture, what is it? So I kind of meditate on that, chew on that, try to understand it, try to digest it, which, crazy, has a huge impact on me, like spiritually speaking. I'm sitting here like studying the Bible, and it's like it's changing me, and in some really good ways. And so there's that, right? But then there's like, how do I come alongside that musically? Because music for me in the church is it's a tool, right? So its purpose is not to entertain anymore. Well, it is in a way, right? It still entertains. Music does tons of stuff, but it is a particularly good tool for ministry. And I think that's one of the reasons why music has been a part of ministry forever. Right? People love to sing. It's a very communal thing, right? We bond together when we sing, and when we sing about something that is true and that is beautiful and that is good, man, something happens, and it's good. So, but to try to hone what I was trying to say. As far as arranging and stuff, yeah. So I talk to pastors. I think about the content. I'm immersing myself in the content and the scriptures that are talked about. But then there's this thing called liturgy. So liturgy is just basically the order of the service, right? So it's how it's laid out, right? So in the church that I work for, it's a little bit of it's a hybrid of kind of like ancient and modern, right? So we have modern technology and modern music, right? But it's also like the church didn't show up one day and all of a sudden we're the church. Like the church is 2,000 years old, right? So there's tons and tons of history and traditions and things like that. And so what we try to do is we try to look at what are the best and formative things from history to help people, right? And then how do I help serve the liturgy with the music, right? So there will be something like a call to worship, right? That's a traditional, a lot of times that's like a reading of a psalm, right? So you'll read a psalm and you read it back and forth with the people, right? So a leader will say the first part of the psalm and the congregation will repeat back the other part of the psalm. And then, so you can do that musically too. So I've created hundreds of settings of calls to worship, right? And then there's confessions, right? So there's confessions of sin and all sorts of different things. And so there's like laments and lamenting over sin and lamenting over the brokenness of our lives and the brokenness of our world. And then there's like, songs of hope and songs of action. And I mean, so yes, there's tons of ways to sew into a liturgy from the perspective of music, using music as a tool to do so. Does that kind of answer your question a little?
No, that totally answers my question in a lot of ways, man. And I, and it's something like, because I think about, I saw a meme once where it was like a person was like, okay, well, I went to church and I got saved, and then later on I became an adult and I went to a One Direction concert and realized I got the same feeling there. And so I think about that in terms of like the guy that has the really nice pedal board that's made out of like some lacquered wood or something with all the Strymon pedals on it, that's doing the big reverbs or stuff, and some of that stuff, I mean, part of me wants to go to church as a musician just so I can see one of these like bands doing these things, because they really do. Y'all are really great at creating moments, man. Like as far as, and maybe that's something that we could all as performers take from stuff that worship does exceptionally well, which is the creating of moments, points in time within something you attended that you take from, like, if you ever think back to it, it's those specific moments, and so I think about that, and I think about also that, I mean, how does one balance that? Because you're right, the church was like 2,000 years old, right? So you got to have some part of that history and that interfaces with the modern, if you go that far with it,
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's really intriguing to me, man. And it's that's the other side of the conversation I wish to ask you about was, you and I are similar in that, like, I went to audio engineering school at the Conservatory of Recording Arts in Arizona, which is kind of a counterpart to Full Sail. And I wanted to ask if there was any sort of, because you wish to present yourself as an audio engineer and to work in that profession and make money in that domain, was there ever like a segregation of like the musician between how you presented yourself and did those two worlds, when did those ever kind of come together? Because as you stand now, it's like you play music for a living and you happen to be an audio engineer, so it's like the engineering part is kind of separate to the composer, to the musician part of that, but at least at one point it was engineering first with musician kind of second, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yeah, for me, the two are very much intertwined because the two are me, right? Like I'm an engineer I think like an engineer, and I play music. So yes, they're different skills, but they're in the same house. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they serve each other, right? And I can't think of two tools that serve each other better than audio engineering and being a musician. Like it's enabled me to just do so well. First of all, it's enabled me to have a full-time job, a full-time career, right? So I do great. I'm able to, because my job is, you know, to be a worship director, but what that entails is I'm also the director of media and I'm the technical director, right? So
Right.
so I really have like 3 jobs, right? And so I'm super busy with it, right? But I mean, I have to build sound systems. I'm constantly, and you know how things are today. You know, I mean, technology has just taken over the music world. So there's so much to know about, you know, how to make stuff sound good. And I'm an audiophile, right? So, you know, my stage at church is pretty ridiculous. You know, everything's stereo and just sounds amazing. And so,
Right.
that and that's just on the in-ear side, you know, because I can't be in 2 places at once, right? So I'm not behind the board. So what I try to do is I try to set up the church for success along those lines. I do all the routing, I set up the sound system, I gain stage all the microphones, get everything set, and then I hand it over and I train a volunteer or I hire an audio engineer to run everything, but I've kind of already set it all up. So they're really just mixing, right?
Right.
And then from my end, you know, I'm on the platform and then I'm just, you know, I have separate monitor mixes for everybody up on stage and everybody's on in-ears. So it's kind of like a studio up there, you know, everybody's in-ears. So it's like you're wearing headphones, you know?
Yeah.
And then you got to balance like mixing in the room as well to try to create an environment that feels more natural, because the part of it is like a big part of it is the interaction that's happening between the people on the platform and the people in the congregation. You're there doing this together. It's not like, hey, come and look at our show. You know what I mean? Like we're together, we're trying to create this experience. And so, but yeah, I don't think you, at least in my life, you can't tease the two apart. Like music and audio engineering are one thing for me. They work together. So
Yeah.
to answer your question about like the church and it wasn't even a question, more of a thought, but you know, you said like the One Direction concert, you know, like what's the difference? You know, how I think what I'm trying to create in that environment is actually not that. I don't want to create a space that is similar to walking in or going to a concert. Like I'm really shooting for transcendence. I want somebody to walk in and feel completely uncomfortable. And that sounds very, you know, in a culture that, you know, not to name names of churches or whatever, but in a culture that tries to make everything as comfortable as possible for people. I think when people come into the presence of the holy, they should feel uncomfortable. Like that's how I feel when I walk in. You know, I walk in and I think, man, who am I? I got all sorts of problems. I'm a sinner, you know, and I come face to face with this ideal, right? This holy, and that makes me uncomfortable. But I think it's a good uncomfortable because it you know, it's like the old story in the Bible. It's like when Moses comes up to the burning bush and God, like talking to him through this burning bush, says, stop, take off your shoes. Like you're on holy ground. You know what I mean? There's something to that. You know, it's like, wait a second, we need to be careful. We don't just walk in any old way, you know? And so I want that to be reflective in the music, right? So I don't want it to just be this loud and proud concert where people just get lost in their feelings. Like I'm trying to create a space where people get found in their feelings, like where their mind is engaged with poetry. I don't want people like just in there, you know, just lost, right?
Yeah.
I want people to be found. I want people to come to a realization of who they are, and a deeper understanding of their lives and the world that they live in, and become forces for good. So that's.
And I was curious, have you ever written a song for the church?
Wow. One.
Just one.
Just one. And it's not even completely mine. Well, I guess that's not true. So I've done a couple co-writes.
Okay.
Do you know Chris Redus?
Yeah.
Yes.
If you don't, he's probably the best drummer in Corpus Christi. Sorry, all the other drummers. I'm biased. Chris Redus is the man.
100%
really
agree.
Good.
Yeah.
So he's also a worship director. He works for Second Baptist, and we've become friends over the years. And he is a very avid writer, but he writes for the church. He writes songs for the church, and so just coming up with all sorts of cool melodies. And so he and I have worked on some things together where I've tried to help him with lyrics. More than anything is just to kind of think through, what are we trying to say? What are we trying to say? And how do we, songwriting is a tricky thing, because, well, poetry in general, because what you're trying to do is, in general, you're trying to take an idea and condense it down to as few words as possible, to where like each line that you say is just pregnant with meaning, so even if it's not something that people get right away, right? And so you're thinking through each line really, really carefully. Anyway, to answer your question, I haven't done much writing for the church, not personally. I've done a few co-writes with Kris. I've done one on my own, but I think what I found is there are such good. Well, okay, so I've become a fan of older hymns, not because I love, the style in which they're placed or the meter in which they're sung, but the content, like the poetry is super rich, and it's deep, and you really have to think about it. Otherwise, you have no idea what you're saying, and I like that. And so what I started doing years ago is taking hymns and then just kind of remaking them. Sometimes I would change the melody and change the meter, but I kind of stopped doing that. I actually found that if the melody can remain intact, all you have to do is just change the feel and the instrumentation just a little bit. Sometimes it's a little bit of the meter, a meter change or whatever can go a long way. Sometimes it's adding a chorus, like our modern ears are so used to hearing a chorus, right? But in hymns, the chorus is like baked into the verse. It's kind of part of the verse, so it just goes like verse, 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 and and verse, 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 depending on the hymn, but. Yeah, so trying to work with older material and recast it, breathe new life into it, I have found particularly fun and effective in ministry too, because I think it goes deeper than a lot of the modern stuff. The modern stuff has a tendency to do a lot of repetition. Like you'll repeat one line over and over and over and over again until you feel something, right? Yeah. And that just doesn't resonate with me. I guess maybe it does to some degree, but I don't know. I like better singing something and not quite understanding what I mean, or what I'm saying, but then going back to it and being like, what does that mean? And then it hits you like the fourth or fifth time you sing it, you're like, oh my gosh, I realized what I just said. That's profound. You know what I mean? It's pretty cool.
Right.
It's kind of like treasure troves,
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked that question was 13, 15 years ago, I was a youth choir minister at a Catholic church. And the way I got the kids engaged was I would find out what they were going to, what the mass was going to be about. And then I would, sit with the kids and write a song, and we ended up recording a whole record of the songs that we wrote. They weren't very good, but it was a way to get the kids engaged. So I was just curious. I know that you're not the youth choir minister or anything like that, but I just if you were ever moved to do something similar.
No, I don't think so. I don't really. I love the. Well, look, I love people. I want to serve people. And if kids are the people I'm serving, then yes, I want to do that. But I think if I had to choose, I love the flexibility that I have in the position that I've got right now. It's pretty rad. Like and this is not the case. This is not what I've heard from other people over the years. Like other people who do what I do, a lot of them, they get burnt out really quick because, people come in from the congregation. Hey, what are you doing? I don't like that song. I don't, why are you butchering that old hymn? They get really hurt and really anal about it. And I don't blame people who walk away from that. That has not been my experience. My experience has been people have been super cool. They've been very forgiving and gracious. Like, remember when I said, like, early on, I made it all about me? I was like, just putting songs in my own keys and kind of just making it fun for me. Like, even then, people didn't give me a hard time. Nobody said anything. Like, I came to a more mature understanding of my job by like going to conferences and, talking to other worship leaders and, in my own prayer life and trying to, what am I trying to do here? But nobody ever gave me a hard time about it. And I've been able to do rock and reggae and blues and jazz and hymns and classical. And it's allowed me to work with, string quartets and orchestras. It's allowed me to really go way beyond anything that I would ever have approached as just a songwriter.
Right. Moving away just a little bit. First of all, how did you meet Garrett?
How did I meet Garrett?
Because I'm pretty sure that's how I met you, was through Garrett. I know I heard about you long before that from Bobby Carter.
Dude, how did I meet Garrett? I'm drawing a blank here.
I was curious if it was through the church.
It wasn't through the church.
It wasn't through the church because he ended up helping you with the Churchyard, which I want to get to in a minute. But yeah, so I was just like, I was trying to piece it together. How did you meet Garrett?
I want to say, so you met Garrett through me?
No, I thought I officially met you through Garrett, but I know that I had heard about you through Bobby Carter before that.
Because I thought that I met Garrett when I started going out to like Surf Club and House of Rock to do CC Songwriters. So like I showed up one night because I'm super burnout and bored playing church music, right? And I'm like, man, I've got to do something else. So I go to a bar and I pull out these old tunes. I dust these old tunes off that I haven't touched in forever. I've got to do something different, right? So I show up at CC Songwriters, and I'm pretty sure that's how I met you.
Okay. Yeah, it's very much possible that's how that transpired.
At least in the flesh, because I knew who you were, I think, just as a result of your work with CC7D. And so I'm friends with Heidi Havda and Casey Lane. Right. So anyway, so yeah, I think I met Garrett through that whole crew, and we became friends. And then the Churchyard thing was just an idea. And Garrett was someone who was really excited and willing to come and be a part of it. So,
right. I mean, it's a passion of mine, but it's very much a passion of Garrett's to see a listening environment, in Corpus Christi. And that's something that the Churchyard was cultivating long before, or I guess around the time that CC Songwriters was first, spouting up. So tell me about the journey of the Churchyard. I know it's unfortunately no longer in existence, but while it was in existence, it was a beautiful place. And just how did that come about?
Oh man, the Churchyard was born out of that missing element for me I'm doing music for the church and I'm investing myself 100% into it, but like I I I needed to feed my soul with something else too, like something outside of liturgical music or sacred music, right? And so I had been playing at Blackbeard's for years at that point, and just really going downhill, just not feeling like anybody cared about anything that I was doing in that corner. Like I was pouring my soul out in some like personal songs, trying to like get people to engage, but they weren't engaging, and it makes sense. I mean, it's a restaurant, it's a loud restaurant, right? What was I expecting? And so I kind of, that began me thinking about, all right, well, I have this job at this church and they have this big facility, and I could start a venue. I could build a roof over the and build a stage and make it an outdoor thing, and that way if it's outdoors, people wouldn't feel like, oh well, I don't want to go to a church. Right. I don't want to go to a church because that makes me uncomfortable, or, maybe I just hate Christians or whatever. But like, there's a lot of baggage, for better or for worse, with the word church. Right. So I didn't want that to deter people from coming to a cool space. Right. So I made it outside, built a cover over it, and I pitched the idea to the people at the church and just said, hey, I can run this thing and book bands, and I have the audio engineering background to build the sound systems up, and I can run it, and let's just see where it goes. Like, at the very least, it's just people coming onto your property. It's not gonna, and I just want them to experience hospitality and good music. Like that's the agenda. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to get them into the church, but I think that as a result of just people coming, that's just exposure. So, people will come like, well, this is kind of different than I expected. There wasn't an altar call.
Right.
And so I kind of created it with that in mind. I wanted a space that was all about the music and all about the person who was up there, so that they could share with us, right? Because I was feeling a lack of that in my own life, right? I wanted to be able to share the ideas and share the songs that I was writing with people, and that takes attention, right? And it takes a place where people aren't drunk, and or at least not all the way,
right? Yeah.
And so, that's kind of how that started. And gosh, it started with, I think one of our first people that we invited down was Terry Hendricks. Yeah. So I called Casey Lane, who had let me play at House of Rock a few times when I first moved to Austin. When I first moved from Austin, I created, the Wounded Dog Squire band and started like touring, because that was fresh off the press when I moved down to Corpus. So I started, playing out, and I played at House of Rock. I became friends of Casey Lane. So when it came time to do the Churchyard thing, I called him and said, hey man, you own a venue. What's all this about? Like, how do I get good talent? How do you promote it? And I had no idea what I was up against. It is a full and a half time job to do a venue and be a promoter. And I jumped in with both feet, and he helped me. He sent me and helped me craft like a spreadsheet on Excel that had all the numbers, all the equations all put in, right? So I could put my artist up at the top and be like, all right, here's their fee. Here's how much I need to charge for tickets to break even. And, then there's tax, and then I got to pay this guy and I got to pay that guy. And you work it all out. And my goal at that point was just to break even, because I started with nothing. Like all the church fronted the money for the stage and the roof. And then I had nothing. Right. So it was just like, okay. So I invested $2,000 of my own money to bring Terry Hendricks down, because Casey Lane said, this is the girl. Like, you should bring her down. And so I called through Casey. I get Terry Hendricks and Lloyd Maines, and they come down. And to my amazement, tons of people from Corpus Christi came out to see Terry and Lloyd. I had no idea they were so popular.
Oh yeah.
But a whole new group of people that I was not previously familiar with just showed up one day, and were like, and they loved music, and so all of a sudden I had this new crew. I was like, all right, who's next? So I go up and I talk to Lloyd up in the green room, Lloyd Maines. I'm like, Lloyd, who do we bring next? And he's like, you should bring Milk Drive from Austin, right? So like this
is that
killer bluegrass band.
Sorry to interrupt, but is that the band? I can't remember. What band did Hope and Hostility open up for? Because that might have been when I officially met you, when I was in Hope and Hostility.
I remember Hope and Hostility. Yeah. It could have been. It could have been Milk Drive.
I feel like it was Milk Drive.
It might have been.
Remember. Yeah.
So I started putting it together, man. Like trying to have an opener, trying to have a local opener, and then like a group that could bring a crowd, because I had to be able to cover the ticket of the person I was bringing down. I mean, it was generally $2,000 or more, always,
Oof,
and it was hard, right? So, and I couldn't keep investing, right? And so the goal at that point was just to break even. And I saw it kind of as, well, the church pays me, right? I'm a full-time employee of the church, and this is kind of part of my job, I suppose. I made it part of my job because I was having fun. I was learning stuff. I was learning how to, be a promoter and how to be an event manager. And
I'm sure it helped keep the job fresh, if you will.
It was keeping it fresh. That's true. And I think, insert Garrett Wieland comes in, and, he and his wife Abby became instrumental in that whole thing. They started meeting with me once a week, and we would start brainstorming. All right, who are we going to bring in next? Who's just a really good folk player? Somebody who will tell stories and engage people, and give them a chance to escape, their reality for an hour and a half, and get lost in a good story. And I found that in folk music. It wasn't hype. It wasn't rock music. It wasn't, and it's not that I don't like hype or rock music, but this was different. Like it was almost more like watching a movie or reading a good book. You go and but it's better, like your flesh and blood, like sight and sound. It was super cool. But yeah, Abby and Garrett became really instrumental in that. They started thinking outside the box and being like, all right, well, let's get a food truck, right? So let's have people do arts and crafts and like sell their wares, so they started like just inviting all sorts of different kind of things. And all this time it was kind of like a BYOB kind of thing. I had to kind of keep that a little bit on the down low, because, it is a church and some people might've got offended by that, but I just tried not to talk about it. and just let it happen. And my approach to that is, look, as long as people are being respectful, it's not going to, as long as it doesn't turn into something. And that was, part of the whole listening room environment, that takes restraint, right? Somebody has to come in and be like, I'm going to choose to listen. I'm going to choose not to talk to my friends right now. We could get loud, we could drink and get loud. We could bring a bunch of beer. But I found that while that did happen from time to time, the overwhelming majority of people were absolutely supportive of that vision. And it just made me super excited.
Hell yeah. I mean, I remember, what's the name of the band? Adam and I. You had me open up for Adam and I, and it was storming outside, so you all moved it inside, I believe.
That's right. And moved it in.
And that was, I mean, until Yash and me played the Old Quarter, probably the quietest room I'd ever played in at the time. And I was because of that, that was the most nervous I'd ever been before playing a show. And I remember that was a beautiful show. I loved that show. I love that environment. And so it's, not to be sad about it, but I am sad that, Churchyard doesn't exist anymore, but I'm glad that it was there.
I'll tell you about that the way that all went down. But before I say that, it harkens back to what I was saying about like the original vision of the Churchyard. It was born out of a place of out of a missing piece in my own heart. Like I wanted a place where I could share a song, right? And then, ironically, I make this place, and it wasn't about me; it was about everybody else, right? So I make this place, and I only opened for people every now and then.
Yeah, I completely get it, because that's exactly the reason Corpus Christi Songwriters was born. Was very similar reason. Like I want a place where I feel safe playing my music, and now you never get to play.
No,
which is perfectly fine. I love that it's about the music community and not about me. It should never be about me. So,
but it started to become. I got super passionate about wanting to make the experience just an amazing experience for the artist, not the people who came to the show. Like the people who came to the show are going to have a good time. I knew that. Right. But I wanted these poor, weary souls, these traveling musicians who are pouring their hearts into songs to remember the Churchyard. Like they showed up there and we took damn good care of them. Like we got them everything that they asked for and more. Right. Like I would go. So we had Wood and Wire. Do you remember that band?
Oh, yeah.
Wood and Wire is another bluegrass band from Austin that was just really good. They're a national band now, and they're still touring, I think. They show up, and I hired. So in the congregation, there's the chef. He's just like this master chef, and so I hire that dude to just make this gourmet meal for the band.
Oh, wow.
Right. So they show up, and I've got all this stuff set up, and we've got, cases of good beer and, craft stuff. And so, and I would go, and that was the best part of the job, because I would go back there and I would just hang with these guys. I just get to hear their stories and, be a fly on the wall and kind of a facilitator of trying to make a cool rest stop on their tour, someplace that they could go and be, oh man, remember that church? Remember that church gig that we played? Wasn't that cool? Like, remember how respectful the people were? Remember how well they took care of us? Like that's what I wanted them to walk away with. And I think it was all, now that I'm reflecting on it, I think it was all born out of like this kind of being burned as a musician, wanting to share, what I desired with other people. So as far as like the Churchyard, why we closed it and all that, a lot of that had to do with COVID.
Right.
But, beyond COVID, what I didn't realize when I started the Churchyard, it was how much work it was. And so I was doing this on top of the full-time job of, running the music program at the church. And so, gosh, during that time, during the Churchyard time, I was working for the church. I was doing the Churchyard. I was working for Delmar College teaching audio engineering.
That's right. Yeah.
For Paul Bissell. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And then I had my own sound company. So like I was doing, on the weekends that I wasn't doing a Churchyard gig, which was, once about once a month, right? I was either playing out, playing a gig, or I was running sound for a gig, right? Just carting a PA. I had about 2 or 3 guys I had 2 guys working for me, and we would just go and set up PAs. And anyway, point being is I was just working myself to the bone, and I ran out of steam. And then COVID hit, and I was already running out of steam, and I was running out of money, and it was harder and harder to get, the kind of talent that because I really wanted to set the bar really high. Like I wanted people to walk in there and be like completely unexpected. That was an amazing show, right? at a church, like outside. Who would have predicted that? You know, I just wanted there to be a little bit of a shock value there, you know? And so I set the bar pretty high with the talent that I was bringing in. That's where we started. That's where I met George Ensley. That's where I met, you know, so Ensley came down, or let's see, it was Garrett put me in touch with Ensley, or maybe Ensley reached out to me via email, because the Churchyard became known like within the touring circuit of a lot of the folks in Houston and Austin and Dallas. And then I started getting emails from these larger touring companies. Like I got an email from Sarah Jarose's agent.
Oh yeah.
And I got an email from what's her name? She's the mandolin player. She's really good.
Sierra Hull.
Sierra Hull.
Oh,
yeah, that's her name. Sierra Hull.
She is an angel.
Yeah. She's amazing. Yeah. So her people reached out and said, "Hey, we want to do a tour through Corpus." I'm like, "This is amazing." Yeah. But I couldn't afford her. It was like $10,000. It was $10,000, and I couldn't. There was no way for me to recoup it. Right. Like I would have to charge too much at the door, and nobody would come. Right. And so that was just off the table. Anyway, around that time, I was starting to burn out anyway. COVID happened. And during COVID, I sold all my PA equipment and because I couldn't get any gigs. Like, nobody was hiring any engineers to go run sound. And so I had, you know, with technology, there's a window where gear still, you can get something for it before it becomes obsolete. Right. So I had all this equipment that I could still get a pretty good price for. And so I went ahead and put it up on the market, and I sold almost 100% of it. It's kind of a sad thing. It makes me a little hard. It's hard to talk about.
But during the Churchyard time, that's when you kind of came into the CC Songwriters fold. I don't know. I forget exactly how that happened. Obviously through the Churchyard. I remember you and me meeting once, and then I think we're just trying to expand the board, make it, I don't know, better, more organized. And
you needed to get it out of your head, man, because it's your genesis. It all started in your head.
But so I mean, for the first couple of years, we were just at House of Rock doing the in the rounds, and then the board started to expand, and we brought you in, and that's when we started doing the showcases and other things outside of just the in the rounds. We did the showcases at the Churchyard, and then we also, one of the first things that we did was a fundraiser at the Ritz Theater for the Ritz Theater.
I remember that one.
And
we did a song swap.
Yeah, it was with all the board members that were musicians in the board.
That's right.
So it was basically everybody but Abby that performed. Yeah. Well, I guess I almost said Gerland. Gerald, also Gerald Flores was on the board at the time. Yeah. And that's another one of those nights that just goes down in my memory as one of my favorite, performance nights ever.
Is he the dude who always wore the taco t-shirts?
Yeah, Taco Chair Dad. Yeah,
Taco Chair Dad.
Yeah, I misspelled his name on the agenda once, and it said Gerland, so we started calling him Gerland for a while.
Gerland, yes, it's coming back to me.
But that night at the Churchyard, it just goes down in history as one of my favorite showcases of CC Songwriters. Period. Just because it was a magical night.
Was that the night that what's her name? Shoot, man, I've just been out of the game for too long. Long curly hair, plays a wicked classical sound. She was Shayna Sands.
I don't think she was.
Sands.
The board was just played that night.
You're talking about the. Are you talking about at the Churchyard?
No, I'm talking about the Ritz Theater still.
The Ritz Theater. Okay.
Yeah. So it was you, me. I think it was David Martinez, Stephen James, and Garrett. We all song swap. Yes, that was just fun. I just loved the ability to do that and share music with each other. And I keep bringing this up every time I run into you, but we jokingly said next time we're going to actually do a true song swap and and
play each other's songs.
Play each other's songs, right?
Yeah, I want to do that.
I think we need to.
I want to do your song "Smoke." That's one of my faves. There's a couple of us who want to do that one. We're gonna have to duke it out for it.
There you go. But but yeah, I think you're talking about another one of the showcase, the CC Songwriter Showcase. I think
at the Churchyard.
Yeah, Josh Glenn played. I think we had Hope and Hostility come back and play. And then Shayna played. I forget.
Shayna played.
Oh, and then I think Garrett with Independent Thieves played. I don't know how I pulled that bill out of my ass. This came out of nowhere. But
stop pulling stuff out of your ass.
Okay, I'll try my best.
It's disgusting.
Moving on.
Yes, sir.
So I want to take it back to like kind of the beginning of this conversation, because you began talking about like needing to place boundaries around your creative energy. And you know, man, like there's a certain thread that I'm trying to loop through here, because I feel like, and I don't know if this has been a similar experience for you, but I feel like, you know, during my time spent as an engineer first versus like a musician first, or producer or whatever first, over, you know, engineering, like it was very like onerous, man, to think that I would have to write something worthy of compelling me to step out of the role as engineer first into artist first, to the degree that I would have something to say that would just, you know, compel me out of that role and draw me into it as an artist or something. So I wonder, like, in your own writing, in your own songwriting, in your own, you know, artistry, do you feel a certain pressure that comes out of like, because I get the feeling you've always wanted to support like musicians, productions, you know, like I know that I entered into audio engineering with the mindset that like, okay, these songs probably aren't that great right now, and until such time that I can write something that's good and something that my ego could sign off on, perhaps, or something, you know,
right. Yeah.
like you know, I just wanted to be that guy that like supported everything but wasn't in the spotlight, you know. And it wasn't until later in life when I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and all that stuff came with it, all the engineering, and it became the sort of, you know, it became the thing that helps all of it and merges with it and becomes one with it, as you described earlier. So I just wonder if there's like some kind of, in your own thought process, in your own artistry, in your own writing, is there, I mean, it's a very complex question, I suppose. I'm not really sure what the question is, but I also wanted to go back to the boundary thing, right? Because like I've been thinking a lot about kenosis and like the process of self-emptying, and you know, like I take things from theology not in the traditional sense, in a way of like, oh, this is an interesting thing to ponder. You know, I look for like secular scripture, and like Spinoza is one of my favorite thinkers, and so I think of Spinoza and his concept of conatus, which is like, conatus is like the will a thing has to continue its existence and enhance itself, right? And so this concept of kenosis, of self-emptying, with Spinoza's conatus, it seems like there's like this, if you take these two and put them together, man, it's like if I expand my own willingness to enhance myself and my own, you know, sort of will to exist, right? If I expand those out with better and bigger reasons, then it seems to logically follow I will have more of myself to empty, you know. And so like the boundary thing on your own creative energy, it's like I kind of, I mean, I really like what you're describing in terms of like this continual process of just emptying yourself, man, and how that can So anyway, anywhere you want to go with any of that, it's a lot. I'm
So I
sorry.
still didn't hear, I didn't hear a question, but
It wasn't a question in there. I'm just trying to be like, all right, pick up anywhere
I think
in
you're
there.
going to need to pass me that bowl that you were smoking before I answer this question.
Sure, man. But just everything you're saying to me, it seems like it's like weirdly aligning with like kind of my own path as an engineer, and then as a musician, and then even your thought processes on like the more mature way you've looked at your job later. Like in the way that you've looked at songs that were green, and then later on you're like, okay, I can see these are green, but that also came with a sort of mature outlook gained over time. And so I just see a lot of common things between you and I, and I've really enjoyed having this conversation so far that way.
I don't know if this answers any of your questions, but it's something that I thought about when you were talking is, when I sit behind a desk, an audio desk, when I'm engineering, to me, it's like playing an instrument, and I love it. Like I feel like I'm part of the band, right? They rely on me, and whether they realize it or not, interestingly enough, I wrote a paper way back when I was in school about monitor engineering and how important, and why I thought monitor engineering was like the most important job in the whole industry, because what it does is it enables the musicians to do what they're going to do and share with everybody, right? And then there's this circular thing that happens, right? So if me as a monitor engineer, well, first of all, I have to understand what is the source, right? The source is the person, right? The person who's the artist who's standing up on the stage, they're the source, right? And then they're going to take their art and they're going to try to share it with people, all right? Well, then they have to have an environment that they're comfortable in. They need to be able to hear themselves. They need to be, because vibe is everything, man. It's like if they go up on the stage and they can't hear themselves, then they're unhappy. All right. Well, then unhappy comes out, right? And then, or frustrated comes out, right? But if I want this person's art in its purest form to come out the way it's intended to come out, with positive energy, and that's going to hit the audience, and then the audience then reciprocates that through engagement and applause and and just attention, right? All of that starts with creating a good space for the artist to do their art in. And I thought that was like, that's the job of the monitor engineer, right? Like, my job is to make sure that they're happy. I want to just make sure that they have like the best sound of their life ever, right? Every time they plug in their ears or put their monitors in, like they don't need to think about any of that tech stuff. They're just up there having a good time. And I want that good time to then translate to the audience, and then the audience to reciprocate that good time back to them, which just creates this loop of good energy, right? Between the artist on the stage and the crowd. And I'm a part of that, right? So like in that way, I'm kind of part of the band behind the scenes. Nobody sees me, but I'm, that's how I see it in my head, at least.
It's funny you mentioned like that's when unhappy comes out, because yeah, man, like I've seen one of the coolest monitor engineers I've hung out with, Julia Nichols in upstate New York. She did monitors at Bearsville Theater, and hanging out with her, you kind of see how like a monitor engineer watches for more than, like, they'll look at the drummer, and if the drummer's kind of squinting and leaning forward, you're like, oh no, that he needs more bass in his monitor. So watch this. He turns up, and then he's like, oh, and he goes back to being completely comfortable. So it's that kind of that body language that a monitor engineer looks out for, that you don't really know until another monitor engineer says, hey, this is what we look for. This is how we tell what's going on. But yeah, that's super cool, man. I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Real quick, Jules, you brought up bass, and I don't want to make this about you, but you just recently had a gig with a full band, right?
I did.
Did the bass player survive?
Man, have you heard about this gig at all? I haven't really talked about it. It was
No,
pretty
I
bad.
haven't
It was
heard.
a pretty bad gig, man. It was
So-
it was
Oh no!
You slaughtered the bass player then.
well, I mean, I'm saying this, but like, I mean, like
So Steven, real quick, Jules hates bass players. That's just known throughout the podcast. We talk about it a lot. So
hey man, Jody is a fantastic bass player. And it wasn't any of our fault. I mean, I don't know why my acoustic guitar was not in the PA system or in the monitors, and then it didn't kick on to like 3 songs till the end, but it was a bad gig, man. Nobody could hear anybody, the monitor situation was awful. Sound guy, I don't want to rag on any of. I can't. It was just a bad gig. It was a bad gig, man. And it happens every now and then. Like this whole week has been. I had a exceedingly good gig in Rockport where I just played solo when I opened for Jeff and Michael, and that went like just best of all possible outcomes. And then I go Packery, and it's just like, wow, this is a bad gig. But
good. It's a gig that keeps you humble, right? So,
well, it's a reminder that this shit is hard, man, and that like, we're all trying to put the stuff together. It's art, and sometimes it doesn't fall in place, and it's not the first time, that's happened. It won't be the last. And so like you take it on the chin, you move on, and, but yeah, man, I just, I would say that like, in terms of like self-emptying, like Thursday, I had really, gone in and, started the whole set with like poetry and played and it was all like new songs that weren't any more than like a few weeks old. And at the end of that, I felt like drained and drained in such a way that was like a mini burnout in a way. And sometimes you get that way. And, going back to what you were saying, Steve, about like feeling burned out and then going into COVID, like yet another part of that conversation that was resonating with me was that like I had been playing like a lot in upstate New York, and when COVID hit, it was kind of like, oh man, you mean we can't go play gigs? What? It was like, oh, you mean we have to take a break a little bit, but that burnout that came with that sort of made me re-examine this whole musician experience. And I went and booked for a club after that, and I did all the booking and sound and promotion. And it was, but part of that was like, every gig needs to be fun, profitable, and rememberable, and perhaps even strategic, and every artist that comes through needs to feel like this is a place they want to come back and play again. And so it just to hear somebody else speak of the way that they care after the musician's experience when they come to your place is really refreshing. Because like, for a while I would hear, wow, man, like I'm going to tell my friends about you. I mean, you emailed me and you got back to me really fast and you were nice. I mean, they're like, when's the last time you met a nice booker? And it's true, but every nice booker after 3 months is like, holy shit, leave me alone, people. Like this is, so you get to see the other side of it. And then you're like, wow, I understand why you don't get a response sometimes when you email out to bookers. It's kind of the battle of the least irritating message.
Yeah, that's true.
So anyway, so it's just all that stuff resonated with me, brother, when you were telling me about this stuff, man.
Right on, man.
I know we've been at this for over an hour now, so I'll let you go here shortly. But anything else, Jules, before I ask the final question?
I mean, I think I really am curious, man, about like because I tend to think of approaching any organization of musical pieces for like an hour set that might be a church service, kind of like you would orchestrate a film. Like you need certain lifts and certain tempo slowing downs before you raise an energy level, and maybe it's all just energy levels, whether you need to go up or you need to come down or something, right? And so what you do is very intriguing to me, man. And even as someone who's secular, it's like it's something that I think that there's a lot to take from it back and forth as to how we care after the generation of sound that's emotive, that brings forth certain affects, how we draw that out of the listener and audience, and how we take responsibility for that as well. So
Cool.
Cool. There wasn't a question there. Awesome. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I just like
It's cool,
on.
man. I'm digging it. I'm digging your thoughts. I'm feeling the vibe. We're on the same wavelength.
Yeah. All right. So as this podcast goes, we end every episode with this one question. It's a question we call the Almost Famous question, because it's what the main character from Almost Famous tries to ask the guitar player throughout the entire movie and finally gets to at the very end. And so I'll ask you, what do you love about music?
Oh, that's a horrible question.
It's such a generic, but I love.
What do I love about music?
Yeah. You know what they say in the movie, of course, is everything, which is, of course, a horrible answer too.
Right.
But
just equally bad.
You're our 16th, well, technically, 19th guest or something like that. But in general, everyone's had a completely different answer, and they've all been, in some way beautiful. So you have nothing to, live up to here. Just do your best. What do you love about music, Steven?
Give me a second.
He's doodling it.
I think music makes me feel something when I play it, and I have an experience every time that I'm playing music. Something happens, and I don't know quite how to describe it other than I can't seem to get enough of it. Right, like when there's something about, and sometimes I get this, just playing by myself with a guitar or on a piano, but especially when I'm playing with other people, like when I'm playing in a band and it's working and I'm not thinking about the mechanics of the band. I'm not thinking about anybody. I'm not thinking about pull or drag or, when it's in the pocket and everything is the way it's supposed to be. Right. And I'm hitting some vocal lines and people are hitting some harmony lines along those. Like there is an energy in that I think it's divine. I don't know any other way to put it, and why and for me it's even heightened because I do it in a church in a way, primarily do it in a church in a way that I'm trying to connect with God, right? Something more, something outside of myself, right? And more than just this experience. And so it's this, I don't know, it's this heightened experience. The short answer to the question is it makes me feel amazing. That's why I love music.
Beautiful. See, as always, every answer is completely different, but it's always just as beautiful. So thank you, Steven, for wasting your time with us this evening. And
dude, this was way more fun than I thought it would be. I had no idea what to expect, but it's been cool talking with you guys.
Beforehand, he's like, "Are you sure you want to talk to me? What am I gonna?" And I'm like, "Of course, I'm going to talk to you." Love the conversation, man, and we need to have more of them for sure.
Absolutely, man. Well, both of you be blessed. It was a wonderful time talking with you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, later.
All right. Till next time.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.